But the band is very talented. I was impressed. So well done. Well done. Okay, so today we're going to have a bit of a change of pace. And, when we talked about the whole enterprise of apologetics a few days ago, remember we said there are different types of apologetics. You can engage in what we might call theological apologetics, where you explain the Christian faith to people who don't understand what Christianity is about. That's something that everybody should be able to do as Christians. But this is really important as we live in a culture where people aren't familiar at all with Christianity and they have a misunderstanding and misperceptions. Or if you're interacting with people from different religious viewpoints, they may not understand Christianity. We also talked about philosophical apologetics, where you use the discipline of philosophy as a way to defend the faith. There's historical apologetics, where you can use the evidence from history and archaeology to show the Bible is reliable, that Jesus indeed lived, that he died on the cross, that he rose from the dead. And then, of course, scientific apologetics, which we've been talking about, which involves using science as a way to defend the faith. There's also another type of apologetics called cultural apologetics, where you are engaging the culture from a Christian worldview perspective. And this is really important because, in a sense, it's a rather practical approach to apologetics, where you're hoping that by engaging the culture, that you are able to show them the value of a Christian worldview that may very well open them up to wanting to know more about Christianity and to perhaps even entertain the gospel. And as I mentioned before, each of these different areas of apologetics are not in isolation. They can work together. So scientific apologetics relies on philosophical apologetics, but also increasingly we're seeing situations where scientific apologetics is intersecting with cultural apologetics. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to give you three lectures that really are centered on cultural apologetics. But these are issues that, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to deal with. And you're going to have to help the church deal with these issues well, and also help our culture deal with these issues as well. And so today we're going to be talking about two emerging areas of science and technology that demand attention from us as Christians, and that we need to engage our culture well on these issues and see them for the opportunities that they actually present. Now, let me tell you a little story about myself that you might find interesting, or you may not. But, oops.
I was going to ask if you meant
I don't know what happened. I thought I had... That's weird. I thought I had connected. There we go. Thank you for alerting me to that. I pushed the button and I thought it was doing its thing. And I never checked. So, thank you. All righty, here we go. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I have never seen any one of the Jurassic Park or Jurassic World movies. Yeah, and people have that same response, like, what? They first of all, they can't believe that I would have my head in the sand to that degree that I've never even seen one of those movies. But they're also surprised because I'm a biochemist, right? And these movies are about using ancient DNA to resurrect dinosaurs, to clone them, and all this cool genetic engineering type stuff. But at the end of the day, for me, the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World movies are monster movies. They're about dinosaurs terrorizing people and eating them. And that's just not my cup of tea, right? So, if that's something you like to watch, hey, have at it. Now, unless you get the wrong impression about me, one of my favorite TV series is The Walking Dead. So I'm okay watching zombies eat people. I just don't want to watch dinosaurs eat people. So, anyway. But A few years ago, our publicist at Reasons to Believe came to me and said, one of the Jurassic World movies is being released, and it would be really cool if you would be willing to do interviews telling people about the scientific errors in Jurassic World, right? And then we could use that as a springboard to talk about Reasons to Believe. And I thought, sure, I'll go ahead and do that. Then I realized, this means I'm going to have to watch the movie. But I didn't want to break the streak, so what I did is the next best thing is I Googled the scientific errors in Jurassic World. And it turns out there's a bunch of paleontologists that are up in arms about all the scientific errors in Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. So at the risk of completely ruining these movies for you, these are some of the scientific errors. First of all, dinosaurs had feathers. Now, this is something that wasn't known when Jurassic Park, the Jurassic Park franchise was produced. But with Jurassic World, this was not common knowledge. And in fact, there are some people who think that dinosaurs actually never went extinct, that they actually are still here with us. We just simply call them birds, where they actually see birds as being in the same group as dinosaurs, and that the dinosaurs, again, didn't actually go extinct. But this is, again, widespread knowledge scientifically now. The Jurassic World producers decided not to feather the dinosaurs to create continuity between the two franchises. Now, also, dinosaurs sounded like birds, right? In the movies, they roar, which if you're trying to make a monster movie, you want the dinosaurs to be ferocious, so they roared, right? But in reality, they probably sounded like birds as opposed to roaring, which is really something mammals do. The dinosaurs in Jurassic World and Jurassic Park were much larger in the movies than they actually were in real life. And there was a scene in Jurassic Park, as I understand it, right, where the T-Rex is chasing two of the characters, and they decide they're going to stand perfectly still, right, so that the T-Rex can't see them. Well, that was a really bad plan, because in reality, T-Rex would have been able to see them whether they were standing still or running. So what they were doing was actually making T-Rex's job easier, right, by not running. Now, of course, it created a great dramatic effect, so you can understand why it was in the movie. But the queen mother of all scientific errors in Jurassic Park and Jurassic World is there's no way you're ever going to be able to clone dinosaurs from ancient DNA, period. And I could spend about 20 minutes explaining to you technical reasons why that won't happen. So the whole movie franchise is predicated on something that is a scientific error. Now, for those of you that are disappointed that you're never going to be able to see a dinosaur, don't get in too much of a state of despair, because there's actually a genuine scientific project where people are trying to resurrect dinosaurs from extinction. And one of the scientists that's leading that effort is shown here, Jack Horner, who, by the way, was the inspiration for the Alan Grant character in Jurassic Park. And Jack Horner is a very well-known dinosaur paleontologist and actually has an idea about how we can resurrect dinosaurs from extinction. Remember, I said that paleontologists think that actually birds and dinosaurs are in the same group, in the same biological group. And so his idea is that if you could essentially genetically engineer birds and revert them back to a primitive state, that you could actually turn birds into dinosaur-like creatures. And the bird that they're focusing on is the chicken, right? And this is serious stuff. It sounds goofy, but it's serious stuff. And the reason why makes sense because of the poultry industry. We have the chicken genome. We understand how chickens develop, right? We've got a wealth of knowledge about chicken biology that you can take advantage of. And so they want to essentially revert chickens into dinosaur-like creatures, right? So if you like the chicken nuggets that are shaped like dinosaurs, you're actually probably eating dinosaur nuggets. and even more so soon in the future. But this is showing how they're going to do these kinds of changes to the chicken. And in fact, there's some proof of principle studies that have been done. Some people have shown that you can take a chicken, and if you manipulate its development in the egg, that it will actually develop a snout instead of a beak, which is much more like a dinosaur. There's another study where people did work and were able to have chickens develop with dinosaur-like legs as opposed to chicken-like legs. So this is something that very well could be possible within the next decade or so, is that there very well could be these dinosaur-like chickens that we have available to us. So if you're walking on, Poipu Beach and there's a giant chickenosaurus that you see stomping down the beach, my advice to you is to run. Don't stand still hoping it won't see you, because it will. So anyway, now all of this foolishness is leading up to a serious point, that this is actually part of a whole area of science today called synthetic biology. This is like a fusion of engineering and biology that's heavily built upon genetic engineering techniques, where people are trying to create artificial, non-natural life forms in a laboratory setting. And it's not just, by the way, dinosaurs that people are trying to resurrect from extinction. There's a whole host of animals that people are trying to resurrect from extinction, like the woolly mammoth, the dodo, and the list goes on and on. And there are some interesting reasons why people want to do this work. But the whole idea behind synthetic biology is that you're going into a lab and you're trying to create artificial, non-natural life forms. Now, most of the work in synthetic biology is done with bacteria and with yeast, right? These are the workhorses of synthetic biology, where the idea is that you can genetically engineer these bacteria and yeast to be able to take relatively inexpensive raw materials and convert them into highly valuable products, like drugs and things like that. In fact, there are certain drugs that are made up of proteins. These are called protein therapeutics. And 30% of those protein therapeutics are actually produced by the bacterium E. coli that has been genetically engineered to produce those therapeutics. So things like insulin, for example, are actually generated by bacteria. People are looking at using yeast to actually create drugs that normally you would extract from plants. And the problem is with extracting drugs from plants is it's very expensive, the supply is unreliable for a number of reasons, and it takes a long time to grow enough plants to get the drugs that you would need, where the thought is we're not going to be able to satisfy the world demand for these drugs very soon. So people are using yeast as a way to genetically engineer them to create very complex drugs that involve a very elaborate metabolic pathway to produce. So this is exciting stuff, but it's also a bit unnerving. And of course, here in Hawaii, GMOs are very much part of the milieu, right? My understanding is the papaya crop, or the papaya industry was rescued by developing genetically modified plants that were able to produce papaya. But GMOs are all around us, whether you realize it or not. A significant amount of the food that we consume is actually GMO food. And this is involving genetically engineering crop plants to be able to produce food that is more nutritious. Those plants will grow under a wide range of conditions. They'll grow in such a way that they are less susceptible to pests and to weeds and things like that. And then, of course, we have cloning and the ability to manipulate the reproductive process. We're all familiar with in vitro fertilization. Well, we also now have cloning, where we can literally create clones of a number of different animals, including human beings. And cloning is used not only in agriculture for reproductive purposes, but people are creating cloned embryos to use the cells from those embryos to create different types of cell types and tissues that have a wide range of biomedical possibilities. And of course, you may or may not be familiar with Dolly the sheep, who was the very first mammal to be cloned, and really has set up a whole industry where people are now looking at cloning for agricultural purposes and biomedical purposes. There's a significant progress being made in what's called xenotransplantation, right? And the idea here is that there's a shortage of organs that are available for transplants. And typically, people that need transplants will probably die more often than not than actually receive a transplant. And there are things that the medical community is doing to try to improve the situation, but there's probably well over 100,000 people a year that are on a waiting list to have organ transplants, and there might be somewhere between 30 to 40,000 transplants that are done on a yearly basis. So one idea is that you could actually use organs from pigs as a source of organs for transplant therapy. And for whatever reason, pig organs are actually closely compatible with human organs. But you've got to do genetic engineering to the pig so that the organ is biologically compatible with human beings. And this is called xenotransplantation, and there's very rapid progress being made towards this end, where it could very well be sooner rather than later. There are going to be people that have received kidneys or a heart from a pig as opposed to from a human donor. So, and then there's really interesting stuff going on where people are growing little organoids in the lab, where you can take stem cells and get them to grow into these little cell cultures that are mimics for organs. One of them that's very important are called brain organoids, these are like little mini brains that are grown in the lab from human stem cells. And people are playing around with them as potentially being useful to treat neurodegenerative diseases, right? Where you could implant the brain organoid into the human brain, and it could actually maybe compensate for lost brain function. But people to experiment with this are actually creating these human-animal chimeras where they will implant brain organoids or inject human stem cells into the brains of mice and rats to see how these develop. And these nerve cells and these brain organoids get integrated into the brain of the mice. This is what we've discovered, and it actually elevates the intelligence of mice. And so there are now people that are concerned, are we actually humanizing mice? And if we are, should they then be afforded the same kind of human rights as we are as human beings? This seems absurd, but there's literally a significant volume of work in the biomedical literature, in the scientific literature, that's discussing these very issues, right? There is the possibility of actually cultivating meat in a laboratory. Instead of getting meat by sacrificing animals, we would actually be able to grow meat in the lab using stem cells. This is called lab meat or cultured meat or clean meat. And the cost of this is right now, the very first hamburger made from lab meat was about a $300,000 hamburger. That's how expensive it was. But right now, the cost of this is plummeting as people are developing new techniques to actually grow this in the lab. And it may not be that far in the future where you could go to a grocery store and have the option of buying meat that's cultured in a laboratory, not attained through slaughtering an animal, right? And so crazy stuff, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the tip of the iceberg, right? But there's all kinds of questions, if you're thinking about this at all, that you probably have, right? Is this safe? Is this ethical? Does it undermine the dignity of human life, particularly if we're creating human clones? what should we do with this, right? And all of these questions could be summarized with a single question: should we play God, right? Should we play God? And so the point here is, whether you like it or not, this is the world that you're walking into. And we have two choices as Christians, well, three choices as Christians. And I sadly see these options played out. One is just simply to condemn these advances without giving any thought to them whatsoever. This is unnatural. We're overstepping our bounds as human beings. We're in God's domain. We just simply condemn it, right? And that's the way many people in the scientific, in the technological community view Christians, is that we just simply condemn new technologies without really understanding them. And I see this all the time take place. And the problem here is that many of these technologies have incredible benefits associated with them. In fact, there are people who think that the next industrial revolution is going to be centered around basically biotechnology, where we're going to enter into a century where biotechnology is the primary economic driving force in the world, right? Because of the real benefits that it offers. The other approach is to simply ignore it, as if this is never going to happen. I see a lot of Christians just say, look, no way anybody's going to do this. This is not going to happen. And lo and behold, it's happening. Both of these approaches basically cede all of the work in this area and all of the ethical deliberation that takes place to people that are non-believers. When we take these two approaches, we're just saying, this is something we're not interested in, we're not going to participate in, and it's going to happen whether we object to it or not, or whether we ignore it or not. The other possibility is, how do we engage what's happening here? How do we engage this in a way that reflects our worldview as Christians and brings to the table valuable insight and valuable understanding that actually helps to shape how that technology is developed and used in a way that actually honors God and fulfills the commands that God has given to us as Christians. And so that's what I'm going to argue for here. And if we're going to do that, we need a theological framework. We need a framework that's going to guide us as we think through this technology and then help people in our culture think through this technology as well. Because in my experience, if you come to the table as somebody of faith and you understand the technology and you've thought about it carefully, people actually want to hear what you have to say. People want to have a religious perspective on these issues. They actually are craving it. And so this is a golden opportunity for the church to step up and really have an impact on the world in a way that is going to make the church winsome to a lot of people in our culture who see these kinds of advances as critical for human survival and human flourishing. The place where we can start to build a theological framework is Genesis 1:26 through 31. Right? This is the creation account that describes the creation of human beings. So let me go ahead and read this for us. The text says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth, subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground.' Then God said, 'I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground. Everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food.' And it was so." Yes, Tanner.
So if that was like, God said that, He gave them all like plants to eat,
Yeah.
why would they need to attack
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. It's about how does this relate to the whole idea of animal death. I don't see this passage as being a dietary passage. What I see it as being a passage that is an instruction to Adam and Eve and their descendants about how to be stewards of the planet. So this is in the context of God saying, multiply and fill the earth, subdue the earth, rule over the earth. You are to be stewards of the planet. And what he's telling them is that in an ecosystem, that plants are the most important part of that ecosystem. That everything is ultimately eating from plants, right? Some animals are directly eating from plants. Others are eating the animals that are eating from plants, right? And so so everything is ultimately dependent upon plants. That's how I understand that passage. I don't see that as a dietary passage, but rather this is information that you're going to need as you fulfill the commands that are given to you and your descendants. That's how I see that. Yeah. Okay, so the most important thing about this passage is the idea that human beings bear God's image, at least for our purposes right now. That's the most important thing. And we talked already about the different views with respect to the image of God. But because we are image bearers, we have responsibilities to multiply and fill the earth, subdue the earth, rule over the earth, and care for the planet, care for the earth, right? So this is actually a mandate for us to do science and technology, because if we're going to rule over the earth, if we're going to subdue the earth, if we are going to be stewards of the planet with an eye towards doing things so that humans can flourish, so that all life on the planet can flourish, we've got to understand the world that we live in. We've got to develop technology from that understanding. This, in a sense, is a mandate for science and technology. Now, oftentimes people are upset because they feel as if when we are doing work in synthetic biology that we are overstepping our bounds, right? That this is God's purview, not our purview. This is God's domain, not our domain. This is what we're doing is unnatural. It's violating the order of things. We're overstepping our bounds. But the problem is that because we're image bearers, we are compelled to create, right? That is our God who we worship is a creator. The God whose image we bear is a creator. So we too ourselves are creators. And that creativity isn't just limited to music and art and poetry and things like that. It's also creativity when it comes to developing technologies, right? And so we are compelled to create as image bearers. And in fact, when we create, we are mimicking our Creator in a way that brings glory to Him. We're glorifying God when we create, right? And so we can't help but do that very thing. And we've also been given dominion over the earth, right? And as part of that dominion, as part of that rulership over the earth, we have the right to use the resources of the earth to promote human flourishing, to care for the planet. That is our responsibility. That is our right. And so when we think about work in synthetic biology, it's really no different than the types of work that has been done in animal husbandry or in agricultural practices, right? We are essentially utilizing what's available to us to promote human flourishing. Most of the plants and the animals we eat are not natural. They've been actually created through the process of selective breeding and crossbreeding, right? So we already are exercising the dominion by engaging in agricultural practices, by domesticating plants and animals. And so what we're doing with synthetic biology is just a high-tech version of that. And so it falls within the dominion that God has given us over creation. And the issue isn't playing God, because we have no choice but to play God. because we're made in God's image. The problem is when we try to take God's place. When we try to take God's place. So I would submit to you that the work that is happening in synthetic biology falls underneath the commands that God has given to us to exercise dominion over the earth, to subdue the earth, again, for the planet's benefit and for our benefit as human beings. Now, where I think people have a legitimate concern, of course, is do we have the wisdom to do this, right? Because we are limited in our understanding, we're limited in our capacity. There are often times in which we develop technologies that have unintended consequences, where we are developing these technologies for very good, noble reasons, and they wind up causing pain and suffering because of unintended consequences. And so there's a lot of concern that people have, rightly so, about do we actually have the wisdom? And this is not simply concerns expressed by Christians. This is concerns that are been expressed by people of different philosophical and religious perspectives. And of course, on top of that, we also recognize as Christians that people are sinful, right? That we take very good things and we can do very bad things with them. That this is part of our nature. And so, as Ronald Cole Turner, a theologian, warns us, synthetic biologists seem a little naive about the human predicament and therefore overly optimistic about what it takes to engineer solutions. What theologians call sin, humanity's unexplained but inescapable tendency to pervert and destroy even the best achievements, is missing. And also absent is any realistic attitude about how well and at the same time how badly things will go as we make progress toward improving our lives. Our technological power is great and is growing quickly, but it is never pure, never characterized by singularity of purpose in pursuit of the good. If this self-sabotaging inner disorder is a limitation of our biology, it's one we seem unwilling or unable to transcend, all the more so because too rarely do we admit it is real. So, in other words, Ronald Cole Turner is actually a liberal-leaning theologian. He's not a conservative theologian. So some of his descriptions of sin wouldn't match how I would talk about sin, but his point is a very powerful point. Even as a liberal theologian, he recognizes that humans are sinners, right? And that because we're sinners, we have a tendency to pervert even that which is good, that we never use technology in the pure sense. And this, unfortunately, is a mindset that is missing from many people who are secular that work in synthetic biology and in biotechnology, is they're very naive, thinking that if they create this technology where the goal is good use of it, it's a noble purpose, that they just assume that we can probably manage some of the unintended consequences as they emerge, but they don't ever think about how this technology could be misused. And I've just been reading some articles about bioterrorism and how work in synthetic biology is just setting the stage for bioterroristic activities that, again, is not what anybody would intend, but isn't surprising given how much evil is in the world. Ben?
I don't know this question's for this class or for you, but do you think there's a difference between sinful nature and human nature?
That's a great question. Boy, they are so closely intertwined because we are infected by the fall, right? Plus, we also are guilty on our own of committing acts of rebellion. So our sin is both what we inherited from Adam and what we do ourselves. But what we do in terms of our sinful behavior is something that we don't seem to be able to help ourselves with. But the way I would look at it is they probably, though they seem to be intertwined, I actually see them as distinct. Because prior to the fall, humans bore God's image in the purest possible way, right? And that what happened is that when we fell, the image of God wasn't lost in us, but it was tarnished, right? And so when we embrace the work of Christ on the cross and we become new creatures and we go through a process of sanctification, what's happening is that we're recovering the original image of God as we become more and more like Christ, where Christ is the truest presentation of the image of God, right? So in that sense, when we become born again, when we undergo a process of sanctification, we actually are recovering our true humanity, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so now something else that we need to talk about as we create a theological framework here is the fall, right? Because the fall is the explanation for why, as human beings, we are responsible, or why we have a compulsion to commit sin. And it's interesting to me that when you look at the consequence of the fall, which is sometimes called the curse, that the curse corresponds to the original commands that God gave human beings, right? We are to multiply and fill the earth, and now there's going to be increased pain in childbirth. That we are to subdue the earth, and now it's going to be by the sweat of our brow that we battle the thorns and thistles to be able to eat from the earth. That we were to be caretakers of the planet, and now cursed is the earth because of us. So in other words, at the fall, there were damaged relationships that occurred. That's and what the curse reflects is, in a sense, the consequence of those damaged relationships. Our relationship with God is severed. Our relationship with other people is harmed. And our relationship with creation is now damaged as well. And so this is the concern that I think Christians rightly have when it comes to the fact that we lack wisdom, that we're sinful people, in terms of developing this kind of very powerful and transformative technology. This is actually something that Christians can contribute in a positive way to the conversations that are taking place in our culture about this emerging technology. Now, something else that we need to keep in mind as well, and that is that as Christians, we aren't left in a state of separation from God, right? We have the opportunity to be redeemed by embracing the work of Christ on the cross. And it's through Christ's work on the cross that basically all things become new. All things become new. So this is going back to Ben's point, that if anybody is going to be capable of actually properly developing and using the advances in synthetic biology and biotechnology to benefit human beings, to benefit the planet, it is going to be people that are redeemed. And so this is something else that we contribute to the conversation, is a redeemed perspective on how this technology should be used and developed. But it's not just simply our relationship with God that is redeemed, it's also our relationship with others and our relationship with the creation. So oftentimes we think of the gospel as being focused exclusively on our salvation. And in fact, it is, right? That's a very, very important point of the gospel. But when we think about the gospel and the idea of being redeemed people, it's not just simply limited to our relationship with God, but it also means that our relationship with other people are redeemed, and our relationship with the creation is redeemed. There's a great quote that comes from a book called Christian Mission in a Modern World. It's a classic written by John Stott. And a number of years ago, one of his proteges, Christopher Wright, republished the book and added commentary and essays. He was a close associate of John Stott, so released an updated version of the book. And this is his commentary on John Stott's view of the gospel, which he says, integral mission means discerning, proclaiming, and living out the biblical truth that is the gospel. Or living out the biblical truth that the gospel is good news through the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ for the individual persons and for society and for creation. All three are broken and suffering because of sin. All three are included in the redeeming love and mission of God. All three must be part of the comprehensive mission of God's people. Right? So it's a challenge for those of us who live the gospel and proclaim the gospel, not to present a diminished gospel, but a fully orbed gospel that includes all three relationships that are broken. Right? And of course, maybe you've heard this expression. If not, this is a very powerful expression, that the kingdom of God is already but not yet. Have you ever heard that expression? Yeah. Right? In other words, the kingdom of God was established when Jesus came. Right? But the kingdom of God is not in its final fulfillment. It's not in its final fruition. That will have to wait till Jesus returns again. So we're in this tension of the kingdom of God is here, and it currently is here, but it's not yet fulfilled. So we're living in this tension, but for those of us who are Christians, we need to live our lives in accordance to kingdom of God principles, right? And that means that we do what we can to honor God. We do what we can to promote human flourishing, to mitigate human suffering, to try to love others, right? Try to improve damaged relationships that exist in the world. It also means that we need to be caretakers of the world that we live in, that we need to be responsible for trying to undo some of the damage that we've done as human beings to the environment. Right? This is all part of our Christian mission. And the idea here is that we are, in effect, co-creators with God. We are also co-redeemers with God. Now I'm going to be very, I'm treading on very thin ice here when I make this statement, but just bear with me. Bear with me. I'm doing this a bit to be provocative and to make you think. Remember, I think I may have mentioned this, that Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, that the Garden of Eden was a sacred place. It was a place of order, and outside the garden was a world of chaos that Adam and Eve were to subdue and rule over as they multiplied and filled the earth. And I believe the idea here is that the original plan was to take the order of the Garden of Eden and to spread it around the world, right? And in doing so, not only would the earth have been covered with image bearers bringing glory to God, but that human beings would have fulfilled the commands, the mission that God had originally given to them, right? But in a sense, the Garden of Eden reflected the creation as God desired it to be. The world outside was an unfinished creation, and so Adam and Eve were to be co-creators with God, finishing the work of God, if you will. And in fact, there are a number of theologians who actually think that one way to understand the image of God is that it means that we are co-creators with God, which kind of combines the substantive view and the functional view in a single package. But likewise, we are co-redeemers with God. Now, it doesn't mean that we're doing anything to bring about the salvation of any person, right? There's nothing we do to bring about salvation. The salvation comes exclusively through the work of Christ on the cross. It is a gift that God, through the person of Christ, is extending to all people, right? But it is our responsibility to actually take the message of the gospel to people all over the world. And so in that sense, we are partners with Christ in bringing about the redemption of the world. Right? If we look at the Great Commission, the passage in Matthew 28:16 through 20, the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And so in other words, we are playing a role, right, in taking the gospel to the world. We're partnering with God. So just as we are co-creators, in that limited sense, we are also co-redeemers. Now, we also understand, too, that part of our responsibility is to redeem relationships, right? In Mark 12, 28 through 31, one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked them, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no command greater than these. That because human beings bear God's image, when we love another person and give them dignity and respect, it's as if we are worshiping God because they bear God's image. So loving God and loving others is in effect the same commandment, if you think about it that way. But this is very much part of our mission as Christians, is to love our neighbor as ourselves. And then finally, we also have a responsibility to bring about the redemption of creation, right? As Paul writes in Romans 8, for the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay, brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. We know the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. And so this is our mission as Christians. So then what does this have to do with synthetic biology? Well, if we think about synthetic biology from the perspective of redeemed people, that the advances in synthetic biology actually now become tools to allow us to fulfill the responsibilities that we have as co-creators and co-redeemers. Again, in quotes, right? That this synthetic biology becomes a tool by which we can live out kingdom of God principles in the midst of our patiently waiting for Christ's return. And so, for example, we can use synthetic biology as a way to make a case that there must be a creator that's responsible for the origin and the design and the history of life. Right? This is something I talk about in my book, Creating Life in the Lab. And we mentioned that yesterday, right? That when people go in the lab and they try to create artificial cells or they try to genetically engineer organisms, in order to effectively do this, it requires the work of intelligent agency. The strategy that's used, the sophistication of the techniques, all suggest that minds are necessary to create cells or to alter organisms so that they are capable of doing something else, so that they are new organisms. And so therefore, it's reasonable to think that there must have been a creator responsible for the origin and the design of life. But synthetic biology and biotechnology can also help us love our neighbor as well, right? That there are all kinds of biomedical applications that are part of this. And as long as those applications don't involve manipulating embryos, don't involve creating and destroying embryos, this is a good way for us to love our neighbor as ourselves. That this technology is going to spur economic growth. It's going to make resources more broadly available to people all over the world, helping people in the developing world improve their quality of life. That synthetic biology is going to help us to care for the planet. that we can create green technologies that give us drugs and fuel, and without leaving behind a harsh environmental footprint. That there are bacteria that we can engineer that can help clean up polluted environments, that will actually use plastic as food, or will help us to remediate nuclear waste and things like that, right? And so, in other words, synthetic biology becomes a powerful tool in our hands as Christians to use to actually fulfill the commands that God has given us. And so, as Christians, we all need to be able to engage these ideas well. And that requires a thoughtful theological framework from which to operate. But it also requires that we have an understanding of what's happening, of what's going on. And as you are going to be leaders in the church, whether professional ministers or lay ministers, some of you I know are interested in going into the sciences. I would suggest that you consider encouraging the people that you know that have an orientation towards science to go into synthetic biology and to biotechnology, or maybe yourself to consider that. And why would I say that? Because this is a great place for you to serve God and to serve others. And in the midst of that, you are going to be embedded missionaries that bring a Christian worldview into the midst of this area of science and technology, and in doing so, help as a knowledgeable insider direct the use of the technology for good purposes. Okay, I went a little bit longer than I thought I would go. Are there any questions, comments? You guys look like you're ready for a break. Yes?
When you were talking about the transplants of the pigs and organs, when did they start researching that?
I'm aware of it in the probably mid-90s. That possibility only became possible when cloning technology was developed. And so that would have been in 1996. And shortly after that, people began speculating on using xenotransplants. And so it's been work that's been, almost 30 years in the making.
Has people tried to attempt transplants yet, or
Yes.
and have failed?
There's still a lot that needs to be learned. Some of the experiments have been done on people that were brain dead. So they were brain dead, but they could be kept alive on machines. So they actually did these xenotransplants on those dead individuals as a way to see how that body would react. And there have been a couple of instances where people were in effect going to die. There wasn't an organ available for them, or they didn't qualify to be on the organ list, and they agreed to do transplants. And I think there's been 2 or 3 instances. All of those people died after a few months. But this is, part of that process of learning how to do this properly. But right now, there's a strain of pigs that have about 100. The genomes are edited in about 100 different places. So each time they do this, they discover, hey, what goes wrong, and what can we do to modify the genome of the pig so it's much more compatible with humans. Using like a mini pig, there was I think the macaques, it was a monkey, old world monkey, that had received a kidney transplant from the pig and lived 2 years. So and this was one that had 100 gene edits, right? Most of what's been done with humans has been about 10 gene edits. So they, really studied and detailed what went wrong and did a number of changes. So we're very close to this actually being a reality. And a lot of what people think will happen is that this will be a bridge. So that if you're on a list waiting for an organ, and you're just running out of time, that they can actually give you a pig organ, and that'll keep you alive long enough that a human organ could become available.
One last question.
Yeah.
When this does become possible and it does become a successful thing, that if it does become developed, would you support this decision for people to have transplants from
Yeah.
animals, or
Yeah.
would you say that is?
Okay, so you asked, would I support this? So that's the whole point of doing this, is to create this theological framework that we can use to. So let's do this as a case study. I'll tell you what. Why don't we take a quick break, and then so if you guys come back at 10 after, we'll pick up your question, and then we'll go into the next topic. Okay? Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, Allison.
We can dismiss. I just like during the break. Is there a particular reason why we need dinosaurs again?
No. There.
Like, why are we trying to fund